All right, this is the last chapter. I will have like kind of a little bit of an afterword, but here are some more jokes that you guys shared from Chloe. How do you get a tissue to dance? Put a little boogie in it. Why does the mouse go to the moon? To eat cheese, and that is from Cooper. What's an elephant's favorite vegetable? Squash. That is from Maddie. Why can't the elephant go to the beach? Because it can't keep its trunks up. That's from Sam. Knock knock. Who's there? Whoo whoo. You sound like an owl. That is from Anthony. All right. So chapter 29, A Watery Grave. In wartime, people expect deaths, even civilian deaths. But the parents of the children of the Benares had sent them to the ship to save their lives. As the last survivors were reunited with their families, the parents who lost children were just beginning to cope with this unfathomable tragedy. When Hannah and Eddie Grimmett talked to the press about the horrible loss of their 5 children, Eddie Grimmett said that he wanted to fight for England. This is not war. It's sheer and cold-blooded murder, and all I ask is for a front-line job. Hannah agreed. If Hitler thinks he can beat us this way, he made a mistake, she said. Eddie was denied a fighting job, but he got a position in the photography department of the Royal Air Force. Even with this tragedy, one more ship with Corp children sailed. The Nova Scotia left Liverpool on September 21st. The Benares had already been sunk, but the news hadn't been released yet. The Nova Scotia set sail before Lifeboat 12 was rescued. The convoy it was in was also torpedoed. Although the Nova Scotia itself was not hit, 5 other ships were sunk. The Nova Scotia passengers were ordered to their lifeboat stations, but the ship sailed on and arrived safely in Canada with 29 Corp children and 2 escorts. No children died, but that was the last ship to carry Corp children away from Britain. Children who were already living abroad stayed, but the children who had yet to be evacuated remained home. Their lives in most cases would go on normally, though there would still be many wartime tragedies. Alan Francis, 10, lived in Wembley, where Ken Sparks and his friend Terence Holmes were from. Alan's father was a policeman from the city of London, and early in the war, Mr. Francis had brought home steel helmets for the family to wear. Like other wartime children, Alan carried his gas mask always. He and his family collected air raid precaution cigarette cards. They followed the instructions on the cards and pasted crisscrosses of stout paper on the windows as a precaution against flying glass. Alright, so we have a picture. The boys were excited to be on a Royal Navy ship, and the Anthony sailors were thrilled to have them. Alan watched airplanes in the sky, as so many of the boys did, and could tell them all apart. He collected shrapnel. Back when his school passed out the Corps information, he was excited. He wanted his parents to send him and his younger brother, Robin. 6. Robin wanted to go too. It would be an adventure, but after discussing it, their parents decided to keep their sons at home. During those first weeks of September, bombs fell over their neighborhood. It was a scary time for sure. But when Alan heard about the ship that got torpedoed, it seemed the right choice that he had stayed home. All the children from his school who were on the Benares had died. All 6 of them. 2 were his classmates, Henry Smulovich and Bruce Hilliard. When Alan went to school, he stared at their empty desks. Those boys would never come back, nor would the others in his school. 6 empty desks. Soon after, Ken Sparks and the other Lifeboat 12 boys were rescued. Alan's house was bombed. He and his brother and father survived, but his mother, lying next to his father under the dining room table, was crushed to death. It could have been Alan. It could have been his father or his brother. It could have been all of them or none of them. Why does death choose some and not others? Why do some people survive the torpedo and the sinking of the Benares and not others? The parents who sent their children on the trip had every reason to believe the ship would get to Canada safely. As it turned out, the children who survived the torpedo lived through the war. It's impossible to know if any of those who died on the ship would have been killed in a bombing raid, but in retrospect, it seemed that they might have been safer at home. People started to write and read reports and talk about what had happened. If only the warships hadn't left, if only Captain Nicole had prevailed and the Benares had sailed on ahead faster. If only the storm had prevented the U-boat from launching the torpedoes. If only there hadn't been a storm and the lifeboats had launched easily. If only the children hadn't been in their pajamas. If only. All these if onlys, they didn't matter. Not to these parents. In the month or two after they lost their children, some of the parents wrote to the Ellerman City line asking for a favor. Dear Sirs, wrote Mary and Robert Dixon from Sunderland. Owing to the tragic loss of our only daughter, Maureen Dixon, in the city of Benares, we were wondering if you could supply us with a picture of the above vessel. It would be very comforting if we could see where our little darling spent the last 5 days of her life. Maureen Dixon had been in Mary Cornish's group. Mary had described her as small and scrappy, with a zest for living. Maureen was 10 years old. She'd written a card to her parents from the school before they got on the ship, giving her location as somewhere in England, obeying the rule not to give away a location lest the enemy found out. I'm very happy, she said. Don't worry, we arrived safely. We are in a lovely hostel. We had tea as soon as we got here. Lots of love. XXXXX, Maureen. George Crawford lost his son George Jr. He had been a hero that night, losing his life when he pulled Lewis Walter into the lifeboat. He was 13 years old. Dear Sirs, Mr. Crawford wrote, excuse my taking the liberty of writing you, but I am given to understand that you have a book giving photos of the city of Benares. You will appreciate no doubt my desire to secure such a book when I inform you that my only son was lost when the above vessel was torpedoed recently. Mr. Crawford had gotten some postcards, but he wanted more elaborate information. Ellerman Lyons sent a brochure to George's father. They sent brochures to whoever asked. Mr. Crawford wrote back, thanking them for the favor. I appreciate this kindness on your part. Eleanor Wright had survived the night. She told reporters of George's heroism, and a month later she also wrote to Ellerman Lyons, as you must probably be aware, I am a survivor from the child evacuee ship SS City of Benares. I'm writing to ask a favor of you. Could you please supply me with a booklet of the ship, as I wish to show my friends the beautiful ship on which I was being conveyed to Canada. After her initial interviews, Eleanor stopped talking to reporters, and years later, when the other survivors organized reunions, she did not answer or attend. Even for the survivors, the experience was devastating. So there's Eleanor Wright. We were just talking about one of the survivors. She's just happy to be alive. Beryl Myatt was one of the 77 corpse children who died. Like so many others, we don't know much about her. We don't know about her days on the ship or how she died. We cannot tell her whole story. We know she was beloved. She was 9 years old, her parents' only child. They had sent her to Canada to live with relatives. They started to miss her. They started to miss her as soon as she left, chasing her departure with letters to her. When she died, her parents held a memorial service for her and made donations to a children's fund in her name. But they needed to do more. Her father called the Corps office in London to ask whether a ship could drop a wreath in her memory as near as possible to where the Benares went down. Elspeth Davies, the Corps welfare director, wrote back to Beryl's mother. I have been making inquiries and am told that in time of war, ships can never tell which course the Navy will require them to follow, and that very rarely do two ships go the same way. So I am afraid it would not be possible to ask any ship to do this for you. Elspeth Davis worked at Corps throughout the war, since so many children had already been placed in other countries. Much later, long after the war ended, she is reported to have said that sending children away from Great Britain was a mistake. Beryl Myatt's parents donated some of her things to the Imperial War Museum in London. Her toothbrushing card, her Mickey Mouse Club card, a report she did for school on how a plant grows, the Corps forms they had to fill out, and the packing list for the trip, with check marks next to the items they had packed for their daughter. Also in the file are many notes written to her parents after her death, as well as a letter about the wreath. Elspeth Davies ended her letter to Beryl's mother with this heart-wrenching piece of advice. You have to think of the whole sea as poor little Beryl's grave. She belongs to a very gallant company of people whose grave is the sea. This is a letter to Beryl from her parents. It arrived in Canada, but she did not make it to Canada. I'll try to read some of it. Our dearest Beryl, this is our second letter to you since you set out on your big adventure, dear, and we suppose you were very surprised when you arrived at Auntie Emmy's to find a letter in your dandy and sunny stories waiting there for you. He will send them each week. We expect that you enjoyed your voyage on the boat across the wide Atlantic Ocean and your long journey on the train to Winnipeg. We didn't suppose you saw any icebergs during your voyage across, as it would hardly be quite cold enough at this time of the year.